Welcome, everybody. My name is Elise Hardy. I'm with the City of Rocklin. I'm a management analyst in the Human Resources Division. I've worked here for a little over a year, and previous to that, I did work for El Dorado County in the region. So I have some experience with applying for jobs in the county and then also with the city. So to go over our agenda for the day, we're going to talk a little bit about some tips and tricks when you're applying for jobs and going through the hiring process with a city. I apologize, my computer has been a little slow today. There we go. So this is just a brief overview of our agenda. We're going to go over the CalOps application system, which is an application system that a lot of cities in California use. Some tips on filling out your application. And then we'll also be going over testing assessments and those types of procedures. And then eligibility lists and what that means for you in terms of getting an interview. And then I'll have time for questions and answers if you have those. All right. So first we're going to jump into the CalOps system. So CalOps is actually used by more than 300 agencies in California, public agencies, including the city of Rocklin. So it's a really user-friendly system. It's going to walk each applicant through the steps of the application process. And it also allows you to search for jobs based on job title, job location, or job category, such as human resources or engineering, law enforcement, etc. Some agencies will also allow you to submit a paper application through the CalOps system, but I know from experience most agencies prefer a online application. So you can also create, when you're applying for a job, you can apply as a guest in CalOps. It is a really quick option if you're trying to get an application in quickly, but it doesn't allow you to save your information into a candidate profile. So if you plan on applying for more than one job, I definitely recommend setting up an account on CalOps so that it saves the information that you've entered before. And then when you go in to submit future applications, you can just go back into your application, make some adjustments as you need, but you won't spend as much time re-entering every bit of information on your application. So CalOps offers a ton of information on the job postings. So a lot of agencies will put lots of information into those job posts. So I really recommend as an applicant that you take time to read the full job description or job posting before submitting your application. The reason being is that there is a lot of information in the job posting that may be relevant, and it may lead you to find that this is a job you really want, or maybe it's not right for you. So it's good to be a prepared candidate and read through the job bulletin or the job posting before you submit your application. And that way you are submitting all the information that is also being requested on the job application. Definitely print out or save a copy of that job posting. That way you can reference it when you're coming back after you submit your application. If you are eventually invited to a test or an interview of some sort, you'll definitely want that job bulletin on hand so that you can reference that during the interview or if you need to study for an exam. So when you're filling out your job application, CalOps is going to ask you to create your account with all of your personal information. And then just like any standard job application, it's going to ask you to complete your education, any special training you might have, work experience, etc. So always, like I said before, take a few minutes to review the entire job bulletin and the application process. The application is most likely going to have specific questions that you may need to answer during the process. Let's see. It's also going to request oftentimes specific documents, such as your transcripts from school or a certain certificate, like a typing certificate to your application. One thing that I always recommend to candidates when you're filling out your job application for a job that looks interesting to you is that regardless of how far back the experience you have, it's important to provide all the experience that you think is relevant to that job that you're applying for. There's a really common misconception that on your job applications, you should just provide the last 10 years of employment history. But if you've got his work experience outside of those 10 years, I really recommend including it on your application if it's relevant. So if you're applying to be an administrative assistant, however, you were an administrative assistant 15 years ago, definitely still include that on your application so the person reviewing your app can get that experience included when they're reviewing your application. So with that, you definitely want to focus your education and experience to the job that you're applying for. Make sure that you give details about your skills and accomplishments in that role, and avoid framing your experience in just your duties and responsibilities. So you want to include anything that you achieved in that job as well. You really want to showcase why you're the most qualified applicant, and providing some insights in that regard are helpful to the people that review your applications. So oftentimes HR has to reject applications because the applicants are really vague or they lack details about their job responsibilities. And we can't make assumptions based on your job title or based on perhaps if you were a manager, we can't assume that you have bookkeeping or payroll experience. So really call out all the duties and details of the job that you performed. Once you've completed your application, always conduct a really detailed review before you submit your response or your application. You want to check for errors, missing information, typos, misspellings, and always keep your goal in mind that getting an interview is what you're looking for. And by putting your best foot forward on your application, that's the first step into being invited to an interview. So you might see job postings on various websites such as Craigslist or Indeed, but you want to make sure that you're always applying to the agency's official job site or your application might not be received. If you're not sure of where to apply to, always give the agency a call. Most public sector HR departments have somebody that's going to answer the phone, a real person who's going to talk to you and tell you where you can submit your job application to their official website. So there might be some positions that you'll see on different public sector places. You're like, man, that sounds like a really great job, but you might be missing the required qualifications or experience. And you may need to consider applying for a lower level position or a part-time position to give your application a really good boost of experience that's relevant to that that position that you want to apply for in the future. So I've pulled some real life examples from our job application process. So you can take a look at these. Like I said, I pulled these from people's actual applications when I'm reviewing them. It's a real live person reviewing each application, typically when you're submitting it to a public agency. It's not a computer or a bot of some sort reviewing your application. So we're not just skimming for keywords, we're actually reading the duties and responsibilities that you've described in your application. So we really need you to tell us very clearly what it is that you did in that role. So take a minute to read through the examples of what is a good duty description, what may not be the ideal duty description. While you do that, make sure when you're filling out your application that you always read and follow those instructions carefully. Include all of your applicable experience. Do not assume that your job title describes the duties that you performed. So if you go on and you tell me that you were an HR manager, but you don't give me a very good description of what you did, I might not be able to pass you. I can't assume what you did based on your job title. Always, always, always be honest on your job application. Many employers will conduct reference checks compared to the duties you describe in your application. So make sure that you're being honest with what duties you actually performed. But like I said before, always feel free to tailor your experience to the job that you're applying for. So if you're looking for a payroll job and you had part of your previous job in payroll, really highlight those duties in your job description. And then last but not least, proofread your application. So oftentimes I'll notice typos and things like that when I'm reviewing applications. That's not really going to make a difference in me passing your application or not. But the hiring managers will often notice grammar mistakes in your application. So make sure you're really taking time to proofread and make your best presentation on your application. All right, so you've submitted your application and now you wait to see if you are qualified to move forward in the recruitment and selection process. Most public sector agencies are going to assess some kind of test. You might not know that you're taking a test, as some of them don't seem as obvious to candidates. But here is an example of common testing assessments. We have supplemental questionnaires, and those are often the questions that are attached to an application. And we'll go over these in a little more detail in the next few slides. Written exams, structured oral examinations, computer skills testing, performance examinations, and a hiring interview. Again, there's some general tips here for you guys to take advantage of. You want to read the questions in the exam that you're being given thoroughly. Oftentimes folks think there's trick questions in exams, and there really isn't. We're not trying to trick you. The exams are really there to assess your knowledge and abilities to do the job that you applied for, and for us to see what sets you apart from the other candidates. Always be thorough, but concise. So if you can tell me what you did in 500 words, try and pare it down to 200 words. It's, like I said, real life people reviewing your application. So make sure that you are not rambling in your responses. Again, be honest. The questions are always trying to assess your knowledge, skills, and abilities to perform the job. And then if you have an in-person interview or assessment, ask questions at the end of your interview to show your interest level. Do your research ahead of time to ask questions about the position that you're actually applying for. That's going to demonstrate that you put in a little more effort to that job versus some candidates submit applications with the wrong city name on them that they're applying. They've always wanted a job with the city of Roseville, but they're applying to me at the city of Rocklin. So little things like that really make a big difference in your overall presentation. So here is a little more detail about each testing method. I know oftentimes hearing the word test or exam gives us a lot of anxiety. There are lots of tools available, and I'd be happy to share those with you guys after the presentation on some study guides and things you can do to brush up on your testing skills, especially if you've been out of the test game for a while. I get calls from lots of candidates say, at least I haven't taken a written exam since high school, and it can create a lot of anxiety. So there are ways that you can prepare yourself for these different types of exams. Knowing what they are ahead of time is really important. So if you're unsure, if you get invited to a written exam for an agency or any type of exam, ask questions if you're not sure. That way you can prepare ahead of time, and that will help alleviate some of that testing anxiety. So we're going to go over some of the common testing procedures that happen in the public sector. The first one is the supplemental questionnaire. So this is separate, these are usually attached to your job application. So you'll oftentimes fill out a job application, and as a part of that application, they'll ask you several questions at the end. Most often, at least in the city of Rocklin, and I know several agencies here in the area, the supplemental questionnaire is separate from your application, even though it's combined in the same format. So we're really using those supplemental questions to assess your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and really do a cursory review of what we're looking for in terms of experience. So you'll see a sample question on here with a bad response and a good response. I won't read those out to you. Definitely, when you're responding to supplemental questionnaires, do not answer the questions with "see my resume" or "see job description above." That's going to get you a big 0 on the score. Because, like I said before, those supplemental questions are separate from your job application. They're an actual test, even though you don't really feel like you're taking a test because you're just responding to some written questions online, but they are being reviewed and scored most likely by the agency that you're applying to. Always make sure to read and respond to all parts of the questions being asked on there. And if you don't have experience or an answer to the question being asked, always be honest. Don't Google answers or try to make up something. I've had many occasions where people just copy and paste from Google, and we can definitely tell when you do that. So please try to avoid doing that, as it's not really putting your best foot forward in terms of presentation. The next one that's really common are written examinations, and those are usually used on entry-level jobs such as an office assistant or an entry analyst, positions where we get a very large number of applications. It allows us to quickly assess folks in a large quantity and a quick format. They are usually used in a pencil and Scantron format where you're reading a booklet and responding to your answers in that format. Excuse me, my phone is ringing. Let's see. So the written examinations are really assessing basic skills such as math, maybe statistics, spelling, grammar, and reading comprehension. Like I said, take advantage of any testing resources that are available. Oftentimes, the agency that you're applying for will be able to direct you to some study materials if you need them, or practice tests that you can take to feel a little more confident. So the next one is a structured oral examination. So the structured oral examination is going to really feel like an interview, but it's not. It's a test. It's going to give the hiring manager or the subject matter experts that are sitting on the panel an opportunity to review your basic personality, your social skills, your capability, and your job knowledge. And it also helps assess your communication skills, presentation skills, and your ability to think on your feet. There are right and wrong answers to the questions, and your answers are being scored typically on a scale, typically from 1 to 10. It can vary based on the agency. So the folks that are participating in a structured oral examination are often subject matter experts in the field that you're applying for. So if I'm applying for a payroll manager position, the subject matter experts are going to be other payroll professionals that have sufficient knowledge in that area to rate my responses. Next is computer skills testing. I just administered one of these today for an interview that we had. It's going to most often test your office skills, your office software skills. So Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, but there is a myriad of different computer-based tests that we can administer to assess your skills. And definitely, these are really straightforward. They're most often, they're most often given online, but they can be used for any software product. If you're lacking in your computer skills, always take advantage of the free resources that are available. I know Sarah mentioned on YouTube, you can check out different ways to access social media sites or use them, but there's definitely always low-cost options available in the area for brushing up on your computer skills. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is performance examinations. So these are most often used for police and fire positions to test physical agility. However, you can see them a lot in maintenance and mechanical positions. So if you are coming in to be a mechanic, we may test your ability to perform a welding exam or identify different areas on a vehicle. Things like that are more hands-on. Positions in accounting may have you balance a ledger or review an invoice. If you're applying for a job in an office position, they may have you proofread a document or prepare correspondence with somebody and review that. And the scoring for those is often pass-fail. Either you do it right or you don't. Next one is hiring interview. So a hiring interview is not truly what we think of as a test, but it is a critical part of assessing candidates, typically the last step in that process. Hiring interviews are most often used to determine if the candidate's going to be a good fit for the job. So most likely once you're invited to a hiring interview with a public agency, you've already passed a test or assessment associated with the position, and you have demonstrated your knowledge and ability to do the job. The hiring managers are often going to ask you questions about your soft skills to get to know you more. And it's a good opportunity for you to ask follow-up questions to make sure that that job is the right fit for you. It's always important if you're in an interview being interviewed to interview the interviewer as well to make sure that, like I said, you're making the best decision for you. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about eligibility lists. So eligibility lists are something that are used very commonly in the public sector. Human Resources here at the City of Rocklin uses them as well. So once an applicant passes all screening phases of a recruitment, their name is typically placed on an eligibility list for that job classification. So you applied for an office assistant position, you passed the test, your name is going to be placed on an eligible list. The duration of those eligible lists, how long your name will be on it, is going to vary based on the agency. The longest I usually see the lists live is for 1 year. Typically, if a list is canceled before the expiration date, you'll be notified via email, so you know that your name is no longer active on that list. And the reason that lists exist in public sector is because typically we'll conduct one recruitment for office assistant. However, that list will be used by multiple departments. So the Parks and Recreation Department could have a need for an office assistant, or Public Services couldn't have a need for that, or Human Resources. However, all those departments draw from the same eligible list. So we get a nice big list of candidates that we can interview moving forward. Folks are usually placed on the eligibility lists based on their final score on those selection examinations that we just went through. And the top ranking candidates are referred typically for hiring interviews with the department. If you're placed on a list, but your application is not referred during the initial interviews, you might still be contacted at a later date if the department doesn't select from the first round of interviews or if another position becomes available. I always encourage folks, if you see a recruitment for a position that you're interested in, submit your application if you're still interested. Another example is if there is a bulletin for a job that you know you're already on the list for at that agency, submit your application anyway. That list might be getting close to expiration, and you always have to reapply if you want to be included in the next round of recruitment and selection. It's eligibility lists are something that's very different from the private sector, and I'll be honest, when I first started working for public sector, it confused me a lot. I'd get different emails from different departments inviting me to interview for the position I originally applied for in Parks and Rec, and now I'm being contacted by Public Works, and It was a bit confusing at first, but always feel free to ask questions of the recruiter that's emailing with you, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer it for you. So hopefully once you get placed on that eligible list and get invited to an interview, you're going to take the tips and tricks that you use today and get hired. So that's the ultimate goal. I don't have any more information for you guys today, but I am happy to answer questions and